Testing, testing. Okay, hold on. Maybe we're not going to need to reboot. Are we here? Are we here? Okay, it looks like we're here. Can somebody confirm? Can you hear me? Okay, then we don't need to restart the stream. Welcome on in, everybody. Sorry about that. Apparently, I somehow double muted myself. So thank you, everybody, for sticking around. Welcome on in, everybody, to the Dragon's Den. My name is Digital Dragon, your host, and hope everybody's having a better day than I am, apparently. Welcome in, Creatix Brit, Shaudel, Voron Noob, Nick, Royal Nomi, Timor, Stephen Poole. You're totally down for a 3D printing stream with miming. Like listening to political speeches on mute. Speaking of mute, 1 second. Sorry about that. Hey, the Shrimp Father, welcome on in. Awesome. I'm glad everybody can hear me again. So sorry about that. Not sure what happened. Other than it's just me. So hope everybody's having a good day. It's been a fairly long day for me for whatever reason. I didn't sleep well last night, as in I was staring at the ceiling in the dark at 3 a.m. and couldn't fall asleep, and was up at 6:30 today and heading into work. So we may wind up cutting the streams short if my brain just kind of disengages, but I do have a couple of new parts reprinted. So we're going to potentially be swapping out parts and trying to recalibrate this over using a static servo, which will also mean that I'm going to have to solder some extension wires. And, it's not just swapping this, but we're going to have to redo some wiring and stuff. The other thing that we could do is, I think, if memory serves me right, last stream we at least had gates 1 through 3 working okay. I am going to recycle the printer because I did just change the printer.config file around. So bear with me while this reboots. I probably could. It'd probably wind up being a better stream. I know there's probably a lot of people that put the build on and turn the volume off or down just so they could watch me fumble around without, and try and guess what I'm doing. But, yeah, long day at work, lots of meetings, and yeah, lots of meetings, lots of fun. So we're trying to get this reset and coming up. Possibly. There we go. Sorry, it was just being a little bit slow there. What am I doing for holding spools for ERCT? Good question. I will probably. I've got 2 rep boxes. I will probably do like I did before with the MMU2 and just use one of the rep boxes, come out of the rep box into the back of the Enraged Rabbit Cottontail, around the buffer a couple of spins, and then in. So that's probably going to be my initial setup. I've seen different people that have run a, like a hanging buffer system where they're hanging stuff from the ceiling and coming in. But the way Cottontail buffer works is you come up from underneath around the buffer wheel a couple, 3 times, and then from the back in. So whatever system I do, it's going to have to be kind of on the back of the printer. Now I've thought about whether or not I can mount like 2 spools, one high, one low on each side. So I could get 4 spools hanging off the back of the printer, which is a thought. So basically you would uh, you'd set up spool holders and have your spools basically sitting, like a side by side, 2 on each side, and that gets me 4. But then it becomes a how do we route, uh, how do we route bung tubes and stuff like that. So there's a way, there's possibility there. It's just how much do we want to hang on the actual side of the frame? How much of that makes sense? And so forth. So with that being said, that do that. For now, I'm just going to run kind of some spools sitting on a spool roller behind it and go up and through. And what I need to try and do is just set up a couple of colors. I don't think I'm going to do like all 4. I think I'm just going to set up 1 to 2 colors, especially if I can find my spool rollers fast here. There's a set over here. Grab these and the other one. And what I'll do is just get a couple of spools going in here. We need to try and see what our next steps are on the calibration phase. So we know we were able to get through a couple of the lanes before we had any, I'll say, kind of snags. So I just want to see it, like, does it go through a home as well? So it looks like it's going to home at least. We got through MMU calibration. We pop, whoops. We're going to pop over here. Oh yeah, Nick, if you have a link, definitely throw it on there because I know a few of us are going to be looking for some things, especially if we start doing, ERCFA or TradRack or some other option. So right now I'm going to say we're going to assume that we've calibrated because I want to see if we can keep going with just a couple, like 2 or 3 lanes, just so we can test out, some filament swaps and stuff like that. The swapping over to the Savix and then recalibrating the servo, I can do that probably off stream. But looking at this, if we've completed our calibration command using the MMU calibration doc, then we would be into the setup configuration in MMU. So after calibration, you might want to review and tweak the configuration and options in MMU parameters. The default values set by the installer are a good starting point, although you will always have to specify things like the dimensions of your extruder, which are very specific. Okay. The MMU configuration guide contains in-depth reference, but some of the selected features are also discussed in more detail in the following section. Configuration at runtime. It's worth noting and a very useful feature that all essential configuration and tuning parameters in MMU parameters.config can be modified at runtime without restarting Klipper. Use the MMU test config command to do this. Running without any parameters will display the current values. This even allows changes to configure during a print. That's pretty cool. That's neat and nifty. So I'm actually going to switch back over to the calibration and come down here to the bottom. So we calibrated, we were calibrating gates, and we were trying to get all of the gates to load. And if memory serves me right, we had most of the gates loading through the first 4. So total 0, 1, 2, and 3. But 4 and beyond is where we had issues. And that was really just we were having some issues actually getting the filament or the lane to make it all the way, or excuse me, the selector to make it all the way. So what I'm going to do here is just kind of go into lane 2 and try and set up the buffer and load filament. Easier said than done because once again I'm using filament that is a little old, or not old, but filament that's been out for a while. We'll get it going. And all I'm trying to do, and I know you can't see this, so let me switch around here. I'm trying to route the filament a couple times, maybe 3 times or 2 times around the buffer wheel. So that way we've got enough buffer loaded so that when we're printing, we don't have a whole lot of filament that, we're not pulling filament directly off the roll, and it should hopefully make it a little bit longer without any tangles or issues. Okay, and it loaded lane 2 just fine with some silver PLA, Polymaker silver. And let's see if we can't load lane 1 right next to it with some, this is KVP Sparkle Blue PLA, or no other better terms. Hey, MakerMind Nexus, how are you doing, friendo? Welcome, welcome, welcome. We are just going to kind of try and run a test here to see if we can just get some other parameters configured and like test out what we've got so far. I've got the parts to swap the Savic servo, swap in the Savic servo. but I'm going to hold off doing that on stream because I'm going to have to oh yeah, words. I'm going to have to go through and do some soldering on the wires and get wires extended for that. So I'm going to hold off doing that on stream just for the time being. Try and get a couple of turns on the buffer here. I don't know about the rest of you guys, but pollen season is sure in full swing right now in North Carolina. Okay, so I actually have two different colors. They are loaded in the lanes. Okay, Timor. Indignant was indignant elephant spool feed. Okay. Ah, yes, I have seen that. So in this particular case, let me flip this around. Looks like we're getting ready to have an ad break. But what happens here is this would allow you to put like so many spools across the front length of your printer. And then you would actually take your Enraged Rabbit Carrot Feeder and Happy Hare and turn it so that the Bowden tube output comes out the back. And you just do I don't want to say a hard loop, but a shorter loop into the back of your printer and ends. So it drastically reduces your Bowden tube. And it works out. I've seen it. I think it looks like it's going to be pretty good. But in essence, you would do a couple of extrusions across here, set up your spools, and then your spools are going to come out, go into your Enraged Rabbit Carrot Feeder, do a couple of loops, come through the Enraged Rabbit Carrot Feeder, the selector, Bowden tube, does kind of a U shape into the back, and then into your tool head. So I have seen this. In fact, this mount is what's not being shown here. It's on the other side of this. So yeah, that's pretty nice. I have been thinking about that. So we do have filament loaded in lane 0 and lane 1. So we got calibrate gates, calibrate Bowden, calibrate extruder, calibrate gear, selection, and servo. Now what we sort of need to do eventually is figure out the length down to our tool head. And that was kind of the next step that I wanted to look at. Okay, so there's a calibration doc and then a calibration guide. So we had configured via the calibration doc. Now we need to go through the calibration guide. And this seems to walk through MMU parameters config. So let me look at the full display while we do this and see if I can't add. That's, at least you can see the printer down in the lower right there. Yeah, I think that will be very flexible, but that is not like a vertical mount. That's got to be horizontal. And I mean, you could basically build that rack as a base and set it on the table behind it, underneath. Um, but it's just basically a series of spool holders sitting next to each other. First section specifies the type of MMU and is used by Happy Hare to adjust primarily CAD options. It's a document in the main README. Okay, blah, blah, blah. Hardware limits. So this looks like it's going through the MMU base. That's the MMU parameters config. So this first section is the version of Happy Hare and which MMU vendor. We're doing an ERCT version 2 with 8 lanes. I guess there would be technically 9 if you use the bypass. Now, next up would be the MMU limits. So this is where you define the hardware limitations of your build. This can be considered the never to be exceeded settings, but one important okay, sometimes the English here, but an important one if you're using selector touch operation is selector max excel. We are not doing sensor or selector touch because that would be using the stall guard or sensorless homing. We're using a physical end stop switch. And this is a parameter where the original gear velocity was set to 300 and the selector max velocity was set to 250. And I believe, thought we had changed that. Guess we did not. The servo configuration, this is where we would go in and change our servo angles. And that will be interesting because the Savic servos use a different gear angle. So when I do swap in the Savic servo, which is supposed to be a little more torquey and a little more robust of a servo, it's going to change some of these angle parameters here. So the servo up, the move, and the down angle will change. Logging is going to be the level of logging that we're going to use. So okay, and I think we're going to leave everything there for now. Once again, when we go to change over to the Savics, I'll have to go through and validate all of the servo angles again. So I don't think I want to change that just yet. Logging is just the level of, we'll say, verbosity, how much detail is included in your logs. We're not going to change that. And then we'll have speeds and accelerations. This is where we did come in, and I believe it was one of these speeds we did move, or we did slow down. I think it was the selector move speed. Whoop, this way. So all of these, I believe, are set to normal, except once again, the selector move speed, as it was trying to move left or right, it felt like we were stalling the NEMA 17 motor over here. So we started by upping the current, and then the next thing we did was we slowed it down because we figured out that it would home from here all the way to the left perfectly fine. But as soon as we tried to change a gate from like 0 to 6, it would try and whip it over real fast and it would stall the motor or skip steps on the belt. And I believe I've moved it all the way down to the same speed as the homing speed now, because we are set at 80. I guess the homing speed 60, so we're a little bit faster than the homing speed. We can try dropping it down to, like drop this down to 60 and then see if we can change a lane with no issue. Right, so let me do a firmware restart real fast. Probably need to do a MMU home. And I want a little bit of filament. It's not going to matter. I'm just going to get the length of it here. This is just some of this old coax PLA that I had. We're just grabbing a little bit here, and I'm going to try and load it in. We'll just go down here to the last active lane and see if it will traverse all the way over there. Okay, see, we just stalled right here. So that's going to be an issue. Okay. That's what I'm saying. Somewhere from the middle over, we're kind of dying. So I do want to, oh yeah, parameters config. And I'm going to put that back up at 80. Save and close that. But the other thing that we can do is come over to, actually, I believe it's MMU hardware. Where are we at on our servo motor power or selector motor power? We're at 8. Let's just jump that up to 8.5. I believe that is a 1 amp motor, so we should be good at 0.85. Yeah, zombie part 8. I should just stop with the parts and just go endless ERCT calibration. Let's home our MMU. Now let's see if adding a little bit more juice will give this a better opportunity of coming all the way over. Nope, we still stalled out right there. So we're catching somewhere and stalling out. So I'm still going to take a look at that. I mean, I'm not seeing rubbage. Of any kind. I still can't figure out why it's stalling out there. Now it's stalling out coming back. Oh, that's stuck because the selector itself is still in the down position. MMU servo. Tell it to go down. Tell it to go up. New position. So I'm wondering if it might be hanging because that servo, like I said, is not like coming all the way up. It should go into a move. If I come in lane 3 here, other than trying to get the filament all the way in, yeah, I know. Well, it's part 8 of the overall trident with Enraged Rabbit Carrot Feeder, right? Because I am still looking at this as the ERCT is part and parcel part of the trident. But in actuality, the trident's done. I should basically have been renaming this as just started the Enraged Rabbit Carrot Feeder build. And sell this series to Netflix, yeah. So we're loading the filament, pool 1, which is the first lane there. So we're waiting for the extruder to reach the target temperature of 200. So we got a nice little warning here that says excess slippage was detected in Bowden tube load, but Bowden there's filament that came out. but Bowden apply correction is disabled. So the gear moved 1,781.3 millimeters, and the encoder delta is 414.7. So we may need to make an adjustment there to allow it to compensate. Friday Mac, welcome in. By the way, welcome in Aussie and MakerMind and Hobby Main. Welcome in, folks. So there's an option for Bowden apply correction that we should be able to set up. Right now, tool number 1 is loaded, and it looks like it's loaded all the way down to the tool head. Now I'm going to do something weird. I'm going to kick that up to 260. And then I'm going to purge a little bit of filament. Now, I've got PLA in it. The reason I'm going to 260 is just in case there's some leftover ABS in there. I want to kind of have it a little hot so I could be able to push any extra ABS out. And I'm not going to do a filament load. I'm just going to tell it to extrude 50. And I do have a pretty little blob there. So we are through the rest of the green ABS that was in there, and we're out to our blue blob. So let's come back down to go ahead and turn it off. So we're just looking at our parameters for right now, and we're only going to stick with the first 2 lanes. I've only loaded up 2 color zombie because once again, I've got something that's causing an issue getting the lanes over. So I may wind up taking this apart and really looking at it to see if there's any mechanical binding that's happening. And I've printed off a couple of parts here that will allow me to switch over to the Savix. And we'll have to recalibrate that the servo itself. And quite honestly, looking at these parameters, the gate loading and unloading, we were setting up, we were letting it auto calibrate these all along the way until we found out that the higher lanes we had issues with. So we're going to hold off on doing any of that. Bowden loading and unloading. This is where we can enable or disable. This was tied to that error that we had, which was Bowden apply correction is disabled. So that's where we can come in and change Bowden apply correction to a 1. So it should be able to auto correct if there's, we'll say, excess play in our reverse Bowden tube that it needs to account for in getting to the tool head. So we'll turn that to a 1. We'll come over here to our machine. We're in the MMU base folder. We're going to go to our MMU parameters and scroll down through here. And we're going to change Bowden apply correction here to 1 to enable it. Okay, so this section here, it basically says, in addition to different Bowden loading speeds for buffered and non-buffered filament, it is possible to detect missteps caused by jerking on a heavy spool, which you will always have going around the buffer wheel. If button correction is enabled, the driver will believe the encoder reading and make correction moves to bring the filament to within the Bowden allowable load delta, in this case, within 20 millimeters. At the end of the Bowden position, this does require that you need a pretty reliable encoder, which I think we have. Hey, Maker Viking, welcome on in. Welcome on in. So we enabled that. The next one to turn on, which is turned on, is checking that the filament has cleared the extruder gears, and that way it doesn't do a fast rewind and it's still stuck in the in your extruder in your tool head, and then it just grinds a dead spot in your filament. All right, Zombie, thanks for letting me know. Take it easy. Have fun at the store. And then again, because that's enabled, we have an error tolerance there. Extruder homing. Happy Hare needs a reference homing point close to the extruder from which to accurately complete the loading of the tool head. This homing operation takes place after the fast Bowden load, and it is anticipated that the load operation will leave the filament just shy of the homing point. If using a tool head sensor, this initial extruder homing is unnecessary, but can be forced because the homing will occur inside the extruder for the optimum inaccuracy. In addition to an entry sensor, the MMU extruder, so that's before the extruder gears, it's possible for Happy Hare to feel for the extruder gear entry by colliding with it. So this is where we finally got our Bowden length calibration to work, because we changed the extruder homing end stop parameter from collision to extruder. So rather than try to feel for the resistance as it hits the gear, it's actually looking for the trigger at the end stop. So we've got that going. So the next set is the tool head loading and unloading. So this is the distance from the extruder to the nozzle, from the tool head sensor to the nozzle, and the tool head entry, which is a sensor above the extruder gears, to the extruder. And it says here, so it's configured, the default is a CW2 extruder with a Revo tool head. So we do have a CW2 extruder, but we're not using a Revo tool head. We're using the NextG tool head. But I can tell you that it's close. We may reduce it just a little bit to prevent any runs and drips. But this would be where we would calibrate that. There's a tip forming setup here. This is going to be the big piece, is the tip forming. That's the critical piece, because if you get a bad tip on your filament, you're going to have loading issues. And that was really critical when I was doing my MMU tuning on the Prusa. I'll make a Viking. Well, I hope you get the feeling better and get past that cold. I know I'm dealing with stuffy nose, but that's because we're fully into, I'll say, pollen season right now. And I went into work today, so I was around a lot more trees than normal. So I did come home and pop a couple of Benadryl. So Falzen, got a weird question. A Prusa MMU, would it be usable on a non-Prusa printer, or should I get a new mainboard and switch it over to Klipper? You can, like, you could use the Happy Hare software and set up a Prusa MMU on anything, right? You could do that. You're going to have to do a lot more fine tuning and calibration. It's going to be a lot of manual fine tuning and calibration, more so than you would get on a like using an MMU on a Prusa. So realize which view I have up now. So we've got the uh, Enraged Rabbit Filamatrix on this tool head. So we do have the tool head cutter, or the filament cutter in the tool head. Okay, so you have the remains of a Mark III Plus, Mark IIIS Plus, and an MMU2. Okay, now on the Mark IIIS Plus, do you have the INC board, and is it working? The one thing I want to do is come over here real fast to the Enraged Rabbit Filament cutter. because at the bottom of this is basically our tool head setup. We come in through the top ECAS fitting, we go through a length of shaft, and there is a sensor right here. There's an end stop and a ball. So the filament pushes the ball over and triggers the end stop. Then we go through the gears, and there's another ball and end stop right below it. And then we have our filament cutter. So the second trigger says, okay, we're basically at the top of the tool head. So we just need to know the length from the second trigger down to the nozzle. This is assembling everything. Okay, in MMU parameters, form tip macro needs to be changed to cut_tip to instruct Happy Hare to use the filament cutter rather than normal tip forming. Okay, so the force form tip standalone. So the force form tip standalone is currently set to 0, which is the default. We want it to do 1, which will say always do the standalone tip forming, and say turn the slicer off. So we don't want to tell the slicer to do tip forming. We're going to make this 1. And then we're going to change this from MMU form tip to MMU, I believe it was cut tip. Got an MMU cut tip. But then we really need to check the tool head to nozzle and the tool head sensor to nozzle to make sure we have the right length or distance. I'm going to leave it where it's at for now. What I will do off stream is shut the printer off, take the fan shroud off, and measure the distance from the end stop at the tool head to, so I'll measure from both end stops down to the tip of the nozzle. Okay. And I'll have to, well, I guess we can do that here. We'll look for these two things. I'm just going to have to shut things down. And then we're going to have to so we've set this, we need to get these two parameters because we're not using a Revo. We want to make sure and double check and see how close we are to those parameters. So we're going to have to shut it down, take the fans off, and do a measurement. Validate and add those in. Make sure to turn off tip forming or any extruder movement in your slicer. Slicer must not take part in the filament swap. It should pick up when purging the new filament to the purge block. So we need to make sure that whichever slicer we're going to use, it's going to be Orca, is set up appropriately. And we're going to need to configure the MMU filamentrics config file. So those two are set. Synchronize gear and extruder movement will allow you to synchronize the MMU gear, the ERCT gear drive, and the extruder gear so that the extruder is not having to pull through the whole system back to the spool. So okay. Yep. So I configured my MMU2 on my Mark III Plus Bear. So I converted it to a bear frame, and it was using it had a Revo 6 tool head in it, and everything else about the extruder was stock. Of course, you'll move the filament sensor from laying horizontally to being in the chimney stack. And in fact, Chris's Basement on YouTube, Chris Riley. So Chris's Basement is the YouTube channel. I followed his tips for setting up the MMU2 on the Prusa Mark III's. So highly, highly, highly recommend that. He's got several tips, and once again, the biggest one was setting the full Bowden length to the extruder. Once you get that set right, everything becomes a lot easier. And I had a lot of successful prints once I basically calibrated the Bowden length. Everything gets easier. So check out Chris Riley's videos on the MMU2 and the Prusa Mark III's. I don't think I want to turn gear motor syncing on just yet. We did turn on automatic clog detection. We did enable endless spool. And what that means is we can just say print, in essence, print, and we choose lane 0. And when tool 0 or lane 0 runs out of filament, it will automatically swap over to the next lane. So life gets easy peasy at that point, and you can continue to print a large job, pulling off of multiple spools. So we'll definitely work on setting that up. Um, yeah, I think I'm going to leave everything for for now, and we want to go back and check those links so that we can set those up appropriately in the philometric, which I believe will be under either optional or add-ons. Not under optional. Okay, I'm not even seeing that macro, so I wonder if there's the cut tip config. Yeah, we'll have to set some of this stuff up. Yeah, that's going to be fun. So for now, we need to shut the printer down. We'll need to shut the printer down so that we can take the fan shroud off and validate some links from our various sensors to the tip of the tool head. So Polymaker mine. Well, if you want, there's a link right up above in chat that'll use my affiliate link status. And, it doesn't cost you anything more and it gives back to the channel. I mean, if you have your own affiliate code, I don't know if you do, then you can use yours. But yeah, so everything's shut down. I'm going to go ahead and turn the printer off. And we'll give it a couple of seconds, a little bit, for it to let the capacitors drain and stuff like that. We'll move this forward all the way. We'll need our 2.5 millimeter driver. And one thing to note, the top screws on this, when you're using the filametrics, the one on the left is shorter. So just be aware that you do have two different size screws there. So make sure you don't get those mixed up. The bottoms, of course, are the same. Normal. Give me just a minute, folks. Sorry about that, folks. That was my brother. He's dealing with some issues. I will have to give him a call a little later. Pop that off gently. Now, give me 1 second to move some of this stuff around and out of the way a little bit more so I can play with the camera. So, this is where I was saying is there's a steel ball right here that triggers an end stop. So filament goes in, the steel ball moves over, triggers the end stop. Then we have the extruder gears, and then beneath the extruder gears right here, we have another end stop. So the filament comes down, pushes another 5.5 millimeter steel ball over to this end stop, and we'll see that both end stops are triggered. So what we need to do is measure from here down to our tip, and from here down to our tip, and get a semi-accurate length, write those numbers down so that we can use that information and add it into our config as appropriate. So let me grab a pen so that I can write that information down once we find it. And I'm going to just roughly eyeball this. So we're about 75 from the lower one to the tip. And 100 from the upper one to the tip. So we're 175 from our two sensors down to the tip of our tool head or the nozzle. So pop this back on there, make sure we get the connector aligned. Good deal, Maker Mind. I never did get a response back, and I never did get any Libra boards shipped. So okay, Dan. Okay, so that's good. So we were at 175 to the nozzle. Okay, so let's flip this back on. I'd really love to see my other string of lights turn back on eventually. Don't know why it doesn't. There we go. Klipper Screen's back up down here. That's our first indication once Klipper Screen comes up that we're getting close, but it's still pulling everything. The MMU just kicked in. So before I do anything, I'm going to come back in here to the MMU parameters file. Scroll down to that section. And where was that at? Here we are. Full head, extruder, the nozzle. What I'm going to do is that was 100. And then the tool head sensor, the nozzle was 75. Default, right? Oh. What we got here? Hey, Westry One, welcome on in, sis. Thank you for the raid. Welcome on in, Christoph, Howard, and Big Jano. Welcome in. Raid and run, have a work call. Okay, well, take care, Westry. Keep your foot up, and hope everything goes well with the work call. You click the raid button. Awesome, Christoph. Welcome on in. Yeah, hello everybody. Welcome on in. I believe most of you probably know who I am by now. I am the Digital Dragon. Welcome on into the Dragon's Den. I am a 3D printing variety streamer here on Twitch. And what we mean by that is I do everything from printer assemblies, aka an Ender 3, a Prusa Mark IV, a Prusa Mini, just taking it out of the box, doing the final assembly and working, to full up printer builds like some of the ones you see behind me, and this one that's sitting right here in front of me, which is a Trident 350 with an Enraged Rabbit Carrot Feeder, which is an MMU in the Voron community. I do prototyping, such as taking part in the 0G Mercury 1 beta program here for a full frame build and enclosure. A Tradrack beta. Actually, the tool head that's on this printer right here, I took part in the Fetus beta for the Next G extruder, or excuse me, Next G hot end that's in the Trident here. So yeah, I do all kinds of various things. We also print various things. We are doing some droid builds. We've built some Death Racers on stream, a Dragster on stream, or for the stream. We did a. We're going to be doing some battle bots. So yeah, all kinds of fun stuff. What we're doing tonight is continuing the Trident / Enraged Rabbit Carrot Feeder stream. So, oh hey Pez Liz, you're lurking. Sounds great. I think I think you just have to do the bang lurk if you want to lurk that way. For those of you that rated in also, if you would be so kind, bottom left of your window, you'll see the Digital Dragon logo and my name, Digital Dragon. If you double click that, that brings you fully into my stream, and it counts on my stream numbers versus staying over in Westry stream. Okay, Big Jano. And Jano, you are streaming tonight, right? And if so, what time do you start streaming, Big Jano? Because Big Jano is one of our other friendos, and we raid into him often, especially on Thursday nights, because he does a lot of like WLED and Lumia Stream and lighting projects. But he also does this very fun thing called, um, okay, so in about a half hour, sounds great, Big Jano. On Thursday nights, he does this also thing called community marble races. And those are fun. Yep, yeet. There you go, Nick. Uh, they're a lot of fun. Uh, Hopefully, I'll hang out and do some marble races. I am a little bit wiped out right now, so we'll see. I may drop out sooner because I have taken some Benadryl and I feel my throat getting very cruded up right now. Okay, so we did set the parameters, so hopefully um, that will help. We'll do a save and close. So as far as our filament cutter, we updated the section from MMU form tip to MMU cut tip. Sorry, let me come back over to this one. Yep. Awesome, Jano. Thanks. So we did make this change in our MMU parameters. We just checked and updated the distance from the tool head sensor to the nozzle and from the tool head extruder sensor to the nozzle. Okay. The extruder is the one before the extruder gear. The tool head sensor is between the extruder gear and the top of the tool head. And then we told it to enforce the use of that macro. And then we have to remember that we need to make sure to turn off any tip forming or ramming movements in the slicer so that those don't get into our sliced files. Otherwise, we'll have some issues. And we'll get back into that parameters file again and continue trucking down through that file. So then the extruder homing, the tool head loading and unloading. This section controls the module responsible for loading filament and unloading from the extruder tool head, and thus is probably one of the most important sections to get right. These settings interact with each other, so you should not guess. Instead, refer to the picture before you make and before and make sure you set accordingly. So the tool head entry to extruder is the distance between the extruder sensor and the extruder gears. The tool head extruder to nozzle is, it's actually from the extruder gears to the nozzle. We're gonna have to take this thing back apart. So let's keep this on here. We will close that. We will shut our printer back down. And then we will actually follow our little guide here to set up the right parameters that we're going to. Oops, and we're in an ad break. So, hey, Hybrid Robotics, how's it going? We're just having fun taking our tool head apart and checking out our parameters. We're doing some math, or at least looking at and checking distances. Okay, so we're going to take our fan back off. And now is where we're going to start taking some parameters. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to write down the numbers and the measurements from top to bottom down through here. So we're going to look from our sensor to the top of our gear. That's 10 millimeters. So and the next distance is from the top of the extruder gear down to the tip of the nozzle. So if we said we were 100 from here, we're going to take 10 out, so that would be 90. Then from the tool head sensor down to the nozzle was the next one, which we said was 75. And now we need to go from the filament cutter down there. So that is pretty much right here at the top of this piece. This filament cutter goes right across the top of this printed part. So I'm going to call that 61. So we'll read through some of these things. So the full head extruder to nozzle. So that is this parameter. So it's from the extruder gears to the nozzle tip. Must always be set accurately. It is a fixed distance based on your extruder and hot end and should not be tuned. Use the tool head ooze reduction to tune out oozing of filament after the load. If you have a tool head sensor, then you also need to specify the tool head sensor to nozzle. In practice, this is often best performed by placing a fragment of filament at the extruder gears and extruding 1 millimeter at a time until the tool head sensor triggers. If you have a pre-extruder or entry sensor, then you must also specify the distance from when this sensor triggers to the extruder gear's entrance. Tool head homing max determines the maximum distance from the extruder entrance to advance the filament to home to the tool head sensor. Yeah, this is sounding like we're going to have to be doing some decent amount of tuning once we actually get filament, I'll say, running through the tool head. So I think we've got the 4 parameters that we need here. Let me get this lined up. Oh, Okay, this is back on. We have our parameters. Need to enter those in as appropriate. Oh, well, here's the nice thing. They do have some of these already configured, so that's good. As far as the tool head entry to extruder is set to 13. So we'll set that to 13, which drops the other one down to 87. Got these other parameters. So it looks like we'll be able to take some of what we measured and some of what's there. How hard was it to build that extruder? Um, so the extruder, the CW2 is pretty easy. I'm assuming you're talking about the part where we had the two filament sensors. And yeah, it's not that hard. There's not great instructions. It shows you where to place them, but it doesn't show you like a full order of operation. Now, what I did was the top extruder, your your legs are like this, and your trigger body is at the bottom. Your bottom extruder, your pegs are horizontal, and your button position is in the front spot. So this is a leg out. This is a leg out. And I joined this leg to this leg, and then this is a leg out. So you'll wind up with 3 wires. Basically, we're the ground for both of these. So the lower leg here and the front leg here are both ground. I joined these two together and then took the wire back to ground. And then the other 2 wires went to pin PB6 and I think it was PB6 and PB7 on the 4-pin in-stop connector on the SB2209. Of course, I ran it between the board and the mount. I ran the wires back there and then just looped them up and over. So we're seeing some parameters here that we're going to need to set. So let's switch over to mainsail. And it looks like several are in the MMU. Well, 2 are in the MMU parameters. And so the tool head sensor to nozzle, the tool head entry to extruder, good stuff. So tool head extruder to nozzle. So extruder nozzle is the extruder gears to the nozzle. We said that was going to be 87. Tool head sensor, the nozzle. That is the lower sensor to the nozzle, which we said was 75. And we got that parameter. Tool head entry to extruder. Here we go. Tool head entry to extruder. That is 13. I try and keep these defaults in case I ever need to fail back. I can fail back. So that's the distance. That is this distance here from the top sensor to the top of the extruder gears. They're saying on a CW2 that should be 13. So we'll take that. Now there's a couple of other pieces here that will go in the MMU macro variables config. So we've got those three. We will save and close this. We'll go to the macro variables config. Sequence, load, unload. MMU cut tip variables. So this is that section that we were looking for where we're going to need to put in some information. Leave that there. Variable blade to POS. This is the distance in millimeters from the internal nozzle tip. So this is the cutting blade to the nozzle tip. So this is this distance here, the last distance that we took. So that was 61 millimeters. They had it as 37.5. I measured it as 61. .37. I measured it as 61. Distance to retract prior to making the cut. This reduces wasted filament left behind an extruder but might cause a clog if set too large and or if there are gaps in the hot end assembly. This must be less than the blade position. Um, and it says 5 millimeters less than the blade position is a good starting point. So, we'll say 5 millimeters less would be 55. Hey, Hybrid Robotics. So you finally decided what you're going to do with your broken Ender 3 V3KE. You're sending it to a new home tomorrow morning. Okay. Let me step over here so I can read a little bit easier. Whether to perform a simple tip forming move after the initial retraction, enabling this adds some time to the cutting, but gives some additional cooling time of molten filament and avoids potential clogging on some hot ends. Sure, why not? We can leave that in play. This should be the position of the tool head where the cutter arm just lightly touches the depressor pin. So this is, I'm going to manually move this around. So what we're looking for here is the position where this arm is just touching this pin. So we need to have it right there. And I have written that down before as 16 and 335s. 335 on the Y and 16 on the X. That's as far back as I can take it. And doing it any other way, I'm not going to be able to get I'm not going to be able to get there. So I may lose some like build area. I won't be able to go like all the way back to this back corner on a print just because I'll hit the filament cutter and cut the filament. So we will change these numbers, but I'm going to copy those. Copy those. We'll change this, and I came up with 16. Well, and quite honestly, I said 16. Duh, it's adjustable. So you have a M3 nut here. And you're just doing that basically as a jam nut. Now I'm going to have to figure that out because it's no longer 16. But I will need to validate that position. Still going to be 335, but it's going to be less than 16 now. So let me go ahead and put my numbers. Save this. Let's do a all. Don't look at my jank tube management here. The spring steel wire for my umbilical actually broke. So I don't know what happened. I'll have to take a look and probably redo the spring steel wire or come up with a different way. Maybe use a piece of nylon tubing. So I believe I should be at 16 and 335. So I'm going to go G1, X 16, Y 335, and for giggles Z 50, F 3000. Okay, so now what I can do is move this over a little bit and see what that new number is. So my X go -1, and right there. So it's truly 14 now. And I'm not sure if I want to make it any shorter because then I start getting real tight in here. So we'll go back into decode 15. We're in macro variables. Make that 14. Oh, nice. They're coming down to pick it up. Cool. Next, this distance is added to pin lock X to determine the starting position and to create a small, safely, it should probably be safety, distance that aids in generating momentum. Okay, so basically it says when I first come over, leave 5 millimeters more to the right so I can do I can get a little momentum up because I'm going to be slicing filament. So it'll actually go to 19, 335, then go do the routine and it's going to move over to 0.5 and do its thing. Now I'm going to leave those parameters the same. Let me see if there was any other comments down here. Mm. Yeah, I'm just reading through this a little bit more. So I think we've got the parameters we needed for our tool head loading and unloading sequence and our cutting information. for the variables based on this table. I probably will send in information once I fine tune this after we do a couple of cuts to make sure that it's proper. Then I'll update this, provide some information to update that table. Definitely probably need to look at the slicer setup because we are going to be using the standalone to force the macros. So we do have to change our slicer config so that we don't go through and do any slicer or slicing tip forming from our slicer procedures. So this piece right here talks about synchronizing the gear and extruder movement. So that's synchronizing the NEMA 14 gear on the Enraged Rabbit Carrot Feeder with the NEMA 14 pancake stepper motor and the tool head. So this will help drive the filament through your Bowden tube and reduce the strain on your extruder motor, which if this is disengaged, which would be the normal operation once it loads, then your extruder is pulling the filament not just through the Bowden and off the spool, but through this constrained mechanism around your wheel 2 or 3 times and then down to the spool. So it dramatically increases the length of and the tension that this is having to pull under. So doing gear syncing is probably good, but I think that's going to be more of a little bit of an advanced option for us. So we'll have to, yeah, like I said, we'll play with that. Right now, by default, it's turned off because the sync to extruder is set to 0. If we set it to 1, it would enable that feature. Oh, there you go, Pezliz. Yeah, you sent multiple focus, and they basically used the different printers to cobble together one working one. Yeah, and so here there is another sensor that's called out in this other section here that basically goes in line and we'll say it can allow for a feedback loop in the amount of pull between the motors and the synchronization of the motors. So I'd have to show the video on that. It really it's basically like adding 2 different end stops again. So it'll allow the one to it will allow the extruder motor to pull harder than the gear motor to a certain point, and then when it triggers, it will engage the gear drive a little bit more to kind of catch up. Is how it? Yeah, it's a really cool little sensor, but I think that's like the next level. Like some of these are not required for basic operation, but become the nice to haves. And I will also say every nice to have feature that you add, like even having 2 tool head sensors, becomes an additional failure point. Just like the cutting. Like I could sit here and spend, days or weeks trying to tune in that cutter and finally just say the hell with it, take the cutter out and just run tip forming. And then just fight the battle of tuning in tip forming. So that's the thing, is everything that you add in that's supposed to help automate is also one other spot that you can deal with calibration and tuning issues. So that's something else to be careful of. We did turn on clog detection. We did turn on endless spool. So clog detection is available when you have the encoder. So basically, if it's trying to pull filament and the encoder's not seeing movement, it will assume it's clogged and it will try and unclog itself. Right? That's what we've got set up. Endless spool functionality can optionally be extended to attempt to load an empty gate with endless spool on load. So and then spool man is something else. So yeah, we'll be able to set up endless spool so that it can attempt to pull, like when spool in gate 0 ends, it can fail over and start pulling out of gate 1 automatically, right? And we'd have to set those endless spool groups up. So it looks like we'll have to set up some features for that endless spool group after reset. Yeah. Hey, Bill Overbot, how's it going? Yes, automagically is the same as automatically because some of these settings should work out of the box. Whether or not they do is something we'll figure out in a later stream. State persistence, this is yeah, right now we're set to, I'll say the default, which is level 3, which restore persistent gate status, basically saying what filament is available, what materials and colors are loaded, if there's a spool ID. That's the default. So right now I've got filament loaded in gate 0 all the way to the extruder, and filament located and parked in gate 1. So if I tell it to switch to tool head 1, even though we've turned the printer on and off a couple of times, it should understand that it has filament loaded to the tool head, do the retract all the way back to park position on tool 0, move over to tool 1, and then load tool 1. If we didn't have it set up, then it would assume no state persistence, and it would have some issues, or you would have to make sure and tell it to load all lanes for a job. And then it says once you have everything working and it's well tuned, then you can go ahead and switch it to 4, which is the highest level. Oh, sounds good, Built Over Bot. Thanks for stopping by. We are probably going to raid out a little, like soonish here, over to Big Jano, just because some of this I'm going to have to do some things off stream. Um, so here's some miscellaneous stuff. Like default extruder temp is currently set to 200. The downside of that is if I've got, say, ABS loading, it may have issues. Some of the other tools that I have seen use 230, so I may raise that up to 230. It's a little high for PLA, but it should still work for PETG, and it's at the extreme low end for ABS, so that may be useful. Um, Auto calibrate the gates, we've done that. Strict filament recovery. So strict filament recovery may be good to turn on. It's currently turned off, but these are all parameters that allow us to gain more functionality out of the out of the MMU, out of the Enraged Rabbit Carrot Feeder. These are the default macros, uh, what they are and what they're called, so you know what to call out in different things. Yeah, and this is where I'm going to say I'm going to have to look at some of this stuff in more detail off stream to make sure I fully understand what it's trying to talk about before I start talking to you guys intelligently about it, because I really don't know. Um, and yeah, that I think we're good for now. I think we've got a good basic. I'm going to read through some of those more advanced steps again so that we can talk about it a little more intelligently. Because you'll see here some of those parameters that we'll be able to set. Um, we can tell in our Happy Hare config here that we've got filament in gate 0, tool 0, and gate 1, tool 1. It does show that it's available, but the selector's not home. Now that's because the selector's not home and there's filament in it. So we really need to tell it to park tool head 0. And I'm gonna have to figure that out. I'm not even sure if I can just. Is there a part? Does not appear to be, and I know I can't do an MMU. So do we have the? So I just told it to do a MMU eject, which should eject whatever's in gate 0. So I'm going to change the view so you can see more of what it's doing. It currently did a home, moved the extruder up to the front left of the bed. It's heating the tool head up to 200. And then once it's there, it should eject the filament back out of lane 0 to the park position. Let's see what we got here. Forming tip. MMU gantry servo is not valid for servo. MMU detected whilst out of print. Unload sequence failed. Error running. MMU cut tip. The value MMU gantry servo is not valid for servo. Because we don't have a gantry. We did those two things. Okay, so it's trying to call, this is what I was afraid of. So it's calling the MMU cut tip macro, which is referring over to this config, right? Here's our MMU cut tip macro, and it's calling gantry servo up. We don't have a gantry servo identified. So I need to go through this file a little bit more apparently. Yeah, I'm gonna have to take a look at this to figure out, because like I said, it's calling Filametrics gantry servo up, but there is no gantry servo. The gantry servo would be used to basically bring this pin into a position to be used. And I've got a fixed pin here, so I'm not using that. Yeah, so there's the servo up and down macros that are being called, but we don't set those pins because we're not using them. Yeah, I'll have to take a look at that piece, folks. This is why I say we're making slow steps. Um, and we are making some progress, but it's slow steps, which is always good to do with an MMU. You can cause damage to your machine if you try and push through this stuff too fast. So with that, I'm going to have to dig through the manuals. I'm going to have to possibly get out on Discord to find some information. But folks, I am sorry, but I am exhausted. I did not get much sleep last night for whatever reason, and it's been a long day in the office with several meetings. I still haven't eaten lunch, and it's 8:30 here, or almost 8:30, 8:15. So I'm going to go ahead and call this stream tonight. I will do some more research. Saturday will be black box, and we will be building the tool heads, or at least a tool head. I probably won't build all three, but I will build one on stream. The rest I'll do off stream. But we will be building a tool head and possibly starting the electronics mounting on Saturday stream. So yay, big progress there. Getting closer and closer to the end on that. Oh, thanks, MakerMind. I will have to do some more research. Also, like I said, I will most likely swap out this servo to the Savix. I will continue to keep trying to figure out why I'm having travel issues to the like 4, 5, 6, and 7 and the bypass. Yeah, I'm just not sure. I really don't know what's causing it. So I will look into that and what may be causing that drag. And then, yeah, we'll come back on Tuesday and play around with this printer and the Enraged Rabbit Carrot Feeder some more. So with that being said, let me go ahead and get a raid started. And as I mentioned, I believe he should be back online, or should have gone live, as long as he does. Ooh. Okay. Apparently Big Jano is not live yet, so we can't raid over to Big Jano. I know it's too early for Creatix Brit. Um, Pick Stitch is up. The Jang is up. Maker Deck's always there. Maple Mustafa's playing Final Fantasy. I'm not seeing Zombie live. Like I said, it's still a little bit too early. I think Pez Liz is supposed to be starting streaming earlier now as well. But it's just nobody is. Normally I go till 9 o'clock, and that's the thing is I'm cutting out a little early just because I'm exhausted. But I'm not seeing the others live at the moment. So we may check something out. Let me see. Oh, not that one. Just trying to see who all may be on and in the space. Does anybody have a suggestion that we haven't been to before? Maybe tonight's a good night to go and check out somebody new that we haven't seen. Looks like the artist Amelia is up playing Dragon's Dogma 2. Gangs and Heresy. Yeah. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of options, so we are going to have to rate out. So for those of you that can, go ahead and roll with me. Let's go over to the artist Amelia. Like I said, she is looks like she's playing a game this evening, but really, like I'm looking, I see her. Oh, that artist Amelia. That always helps if you spell it right. There we go. And like I said, that artist Amelia is she games, she paints, she does some amazing uh, paintings, and she'll paint figures. So I've seen her do some Warhammer 40,000, not the miniatures, but larger, like 6-7 inch figures. And she does some amazing painting. She normally does some of that during the daytime, is where I catch her doing that. But definitely come with me and raid over into the artist Amelia. Once again, she's playing Dragon's Dogma 2 right now. But please go with me as we go over and raid, show her some love. And maybe I'll see you guys a little bit later on tonight over on Big Jano's channel for some community marble races. Thank you, everybody, for being here and walking through this config with me. And I will see you guys on Saturday morning. And I promise I'll be a little bit brighter and a little bit more articulate with my So thanks a lot, everybody. Have a great night. Bye now.